Good evening, you're watching Left, Right and Centre. I'm Nidhi Razdan. On the show this evening, it's another black day for the rupee and for the stock markets. Clearly, the government unable to inspire confidence. In addition to everything else, as we wait for the food security bill to be passed by Parliament, can India afford to spend lakhs of crores on welfare schemes? Has Sonia Gandhi's welfare economics hurt the Indian economy? That's going to be our big focus this evening, and that comes on a day when the rupee closed below the 64 mark for the first time ever. Despite the RBI's efforts, the stock markets also closed 340 points down, indicating just how little confidence they have in the UPA today. Just how bad is it? Kajori Sen reports.
Another record low for the rupee. It plummeted below 64.5 and closed below 64. This despite the RBI booster banks that came late last night. The RBI announced it would buy back bonds worth 8,000 crore rupees. This would pump money into the system and control long-term yields. The measure was supposed to bring confidence back into the system. It didn't. The Sensex opened 300 points up but closed 340 points down. So what went wrong? The answer is that external factors really kicked in here, with dollar buying really hotting up, particularly with the Federal Reserve meeting and the minutes coming out any time later today. But with that happening, of course, things could get even worse. In two separate reports, Deutsche Bank and UBS said the rupee could touch 70 to the dollar by the end of the month. But a revival is expected only by the end of the year.
Central banks should opt first to stabilize the economy rather than to revive growth. So sadly, despite a slowing growth, you may have to have tighter fiscal and monetary policy being put in place, even despite a slowing economy.
I think in trying to control the rupee, perhaps inadvertently there was many more disruptions caused. What is required is a focus on promoting growth, promoting exports, promoting local industry, promoting investment in the industrial sector.
As economists debate where the rupee is going, for you and me, it spells bad news, with prices of phones and laptops going up. In fact, some kinds of edible oils have also been impacted.
अगर प्राइसेस बढ़ेंगे तो टैप्स की स्टॉकिंग हम लोग कम करेंगे एज़ कम्पेयर टू अगर अभी जो एज टुडेज डेट प्राइसेस जो हैं उसके हिसाब से हम लोग 3 से 4 पीसेस स्टॉक में रखते हैं. अगर प्राइसेस बढ़ेंगे तो फिर हम लोग एक एक पीस ही रखेंगे अगर सेल कम हुई तो.
जैसे किसी में 5 लीटर के साथ 1 लीटर फ्री आ गया, कस्टमर को बताते हैं कि ये लो आप, इसमें फ़ायदा है, हमारी भी सेल उसमें बढ़ती है.
So far, the impact of the rupee depreciation has been limited, but if the rupee falls further or stays at these levels for too long, the Reserve Bank will have to walk a tightrope. Let the currency go or let inflation get worse. In New Delhi, with Ishita Bhaduri, Kajori Sen for NDTV.
Well, this entire debate on the economy is taking place at a time when the food security bill, which by the government's estimates will cost about 1.25 lakh crores, is expected to come up before Parliament tomorrow. That is, if the opposition allows it to function. Now, many have criticized these welfare schemes at a time when the economy is in such deep trouble. The question is, have these welfare schemes that have been pushed by Sonia Gandhi and her National Advisory Council, have they in the long term now hurt the Indian economy? Joining us first on the program tonight is Dr. Subir Gokarn, the former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India and now Director Research for Brookings India. We have Dr. Arvind Virmani, the former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India and former Executive Director of the IMF. Also with us tonight, we have food activist, writer and former NAC member Mr. Harsh Mandar joining us, and author and columnist Tavleen Singh is here in the studio with us. Dr. Gokarn, let me first ask you a different question, because we've been talking about so much negativity on the economy for the last few days. But there are some who believe that we're talking about too much gloom and doom. Economist Paul Krugman has written in the New York Times that yes, the rupee is plunging, but why is everyone panicking? It's not as bad as everyone thinks it is. What would you say to that?
I think the positive aspect of rupee depreciation is that Indian exports become more competitive, and that then helps. Of course, most of our exports are labor intensive, at least some manufactured exports. And that helps to generate demand for these products and also jobs that come with it. But I think we've got to be a little careful in making a sort of sweeping statement on this, because one reason why our current account has been so battered in the last couple of years, and why it's risen to the level it has, 4.8% of GDP in the last full year, is that we've basically stopped exporting iron ore. Our iron ore exports have shrunk very significantly, and we've started importing very large amounts of coal. Now, these are not related to prices. These are not factors that or outcomes that are related to exchange rate or competitiveness that comes from a lower rupee. These are basically structural bottlenecks, constraints on the production of iron ore and the production of coal. So that exchange rate story will work on some sectors. Some sectors will do well. I think we're already seeing some signs of that in software. There is some buoyancy in that industry, IT, ITS, and on things like governments. But the large gap in the current account deficit that emerged over the last couple of years, I think is attributable to things other than exchange rate dynamics, and I think that's something we've got to worry about. Those need solutions that are outside of this exchange rate argument.
Okay, so you're saying that while there are some positives to look at, the overall picture isn't something that we should take for granted, and there is a lot to worry about. Dr. Virmani, what do we do from here? Because clearly the RBI tried late last night to inject some measures to see and hoped obviously that the stock markets would react positively to that and that it would help the rupee. That hasn't happened. Why is the sentiment so negative?
Well, that is the whole story of economic reforms. As you know, people have been waiting for certain legislations to be passed. There have been hopeful signs coming from September, but unfortunately they've been disappointed again. So the underlying cause is basically the loss of competitiveness of the economy, which has a lot to do with the absence of policy reforms to remove bottlenecks, to provide, to remove the disincentives for investment. But having said that, we have to remember, and I disagree slightly with Subir, is that over the last 4 years till about last year, the real effective exchange rate of the rupee appreciated. What that basically means is that the inflation differential, the higher inflation in India, was not compensated by a equivalent depreciation of the rupee, and therefore that added to the lack of competitiveness of the economy. So having corrected it, I think by now it's corrected and perhaps a little over corrected, and that will definitely have an effect on not only exports and imports but also on investment, because the investment calculation of somebody comparing India with any other country, suppose whether it's a domestic investor or a foreign investor, and says, okay, should I invest in India or should I invest, let's say, in Indonesia, this factor is very relevant, the real exchange rate.
But is it too late? Is it too late? Whatever the government's trying to do now in terms of whatever steps are being taken to revive sentiment, is it just too late? Yeah. Do you think everyone's just waiting for a new dispensation to come, a new government to come? There's just too much uncertainty politically in this country as well.
Right. So that's the other side of the story, that in some sense, because too little, the common expression of too little too late, by not acting decisively in the last year and a half, and of course over the last 4 years, what you are doing is you're constantly reducing the options. You're reducing your options and you get boxed into a corner where there's very little left to do. So one of the things which has happened is when we had this external development which drew people's attention, you had the capital flow and drew people's attention to the current account deficit, your options on the interest rate are limited. Because if you want to revive growth, and as I have asserted both outside and in the RBI on the committee, you need to reduce the interest rates. But what this led you to do was actually to raise them to keep the rupee from collapsing. So what I had suggested in a note a couple of days ago was that the only way to do it is what is called an interest rate twist. But this is not easy, and it is not is not very easy to maintain. It runs out. So what you do is basically you raise the short-term interest rates to keep speculative runs on the rupee minimized, but you have to lower the long-term interest rate, and by its nature it's a very hard thing to do. So you kind of run out of options. If the exchange rate had been adjusted earlier, then that problem would not have been there, and you could have focused only on the growth story. Right. But because of all these delays, you've kind of restricted yourself into a corner.
boxed yourself into a corner, run out of options. That's what Dr. Arvind Virmani says, Tavleen Singh. And here we are, tomorrow possibly looking at the passage of this food security bill, which on principle most people say they would not disagree with. And you have very strongly opposed the whole way in which it's being implemented. Now, not just the food bill, do you really believe that Sonia Gandhi's economic policies all these years are part of what is hurting us today, the welfare schemes?
I blame her completely. I really believe that if we had continued to listen to the Prime Minister and if we had taken the route that he was suggesting, we wouldn't be in this mess. But instead, whenever he tried, for instance, to control, because, you know, I don't know about interest rates and all that. I don't want to get into all that because I don't understand that. But what I do understand is when you are discouraging investment by changing the rules, by stopping projects, and when all of this started with Jairam Ramesh, when he started stopping major projects after thousands of crores being invested. And when he did this, the Prime Minister tried to stop him, I don't know if you remember,
yes.
And Sonia came out batting for him. And then Rahul Gandhi went off to Vedanta when it was being stopped in the Niyamgiri Hills and said, I'm your little Sipahi in Delhi and all that sort of business. So, you know, when you send that kind of message that at the very top your political leadership does not believe in growth for the economy, you know, that is a problem. And then the other thing is that I don't think they notice, because I don't think them economists either, you know, Sonia or Rahul Gandhi. So what they didn't notice is that you could have spent this kind of money if you were growing at 8%. But when the growth rate drops, you know, it's like when a housewife whose husband comes home and says, you know, there's no money left in the bank, and she goes out and buys another Chanel necklace or, you know, a Louis Vuitton bag, and that is what we've been doing. And my opposition, actually, particularly to the food bill, is based on the fact that it's not going to work. Anyone who goes to the villages and talks to local officials will tell you this, that they don't even have the storage space for it. Secondly, it's for 70% of India. How much of that is going to go to middle-class people who don't need this huge subsidy? And you're going to bust the budget doing it.